The dim light of the restaurant flickered as Julian Banks quietly entered, unnoticed by the bustling staff. He wasn't here to make a scene. He wasn't here to stand out at all. He just wanted a simple meal at a place he owned, but no one knew he was behind. The Riverstone Grill had been a mess since he acquired it 6 months ago. Poor reviews, high turnover, and food costs eating away at the profits. But tonight, he wasn't a silent investor. He was just a guy named Matthews, looking for a bite to eat, hoping to blend in. The hostess barely looked him in the eye. The manager, slick, overgelled and barking orders, seemed too busy to care about the customers. Julian took a seat, sensing the unease in the room. Something wasn't right. The staff moved in haste, avoiding eye contact, and whispers filled the air. Then, when the waitress, Oriana, brought his steak, she did something unexpected. As she placed the plate down, her hand slipped something underneath it. At first glance, it was just a napkin, but the moment Julian unfolded it, his stomach dropped. The words written in shaky handwriting on the napkin were simple but chilling. He watches the cameras. Julian froze. Who had written this? Why were they warning him? The restaurant was supposed to be his investment, but now it felt like a trap. A silent warning. This wasn't just a bad night at a struggling business. This was something far worse, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. And it was only the beginning. Julian Banks had built his empire in the shadows. He wasn't the flashy, loud billionaire seen in tabloids. He preferred it that way, quiet, unnoticed, operating from behind the scenes. Most people didn't know his name, and that was exactly how he wanted it. With an $80 million fortune in his hands, Julian had investments everywhere. But Riverstone Grill was different. He had bought the struggling steakhouse 6 months ago, hoping to turn it around quietly, without fanfare. The restaurant's reviews were poor, its staff was constantly changing, and the numbers didn't make sense. Julian couldn't understand why it was losing money, so he decided to visit, not as the owner, but as a regular customer. He booked a table under a fake name, Matthews, and dressed down, hoodie, jeans, and scuffed boots. He wanted to observe, to get a feel for what was really going on behind the kitchen doors. As he walked in, the atmosphere was tense. The hostess barely glanced at him, and the manager, a sharp-looking man with an attitude, was too busy barking orders to notice anything else. The staff seemed on edge, their eyes darting nervously. Something felt off. Julian observed everything with a quiet intensity, trying to remain unnoticed. Then Oriana, the waitress who approached him with a forced smile, caught his attention. She seemed out of place here, tired eyes, polite but distant. Julian couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. As she placed his steak on the table, her hand slipped something underneath his plate, and without thinking, Julian grabbed it. What was written on the napkin would change everything. This wasn't just a failing restaurant. This was a place on the edge of something much darker. Julian sat alone, the weight of the napkin in his hand heavier than the steak in front of him. The message, scrawled in shaky handwriting, had hit him harder than he anticipated. He knew there was something wrong with Riverstone Grill, but this was something deeper, something personal. As he unfolded the napkin, his pulse quickened. He watches the cameras. The words were simple, but they were a warning. Who was watching? And why had they chosen this moment, this quiet dinner, to send such a cryptic message? The restaurant, once a quiet investment opportunity, now felt like a ticking time bomb. Julian scanned the room, his eyes quickly darting to the corners, the ceiling. Security cameras. He had known they were there, but he hadn't realized how much they could reveal. And then there was Greg, the manager, pacing back and forth in the kitchen area. His presence seemed to agitate the staff even more. It wasn't just bad management, it was intimidation. Julian's experience in business and corporate investigations kicked into gear. He wasn't just a passive observer now. He had to find out who was behind this, what was really happening at Riverstone Grill. The message was clear. Someone was in trouble, and it was clear they knew who Julian was. But how? Why hadn't anyone reached out sooner? His instincts told him that this wasn't just about bad reviews or financial struggles. It was about control, power, and fear. As he sat there, finishing his steak, Julian made a decision. He wouldn't just walk away. This wasn't going to be a quiet night. Not anymore. Something had to change, and he would be the one to make it happen. The night dragged on as Julian sat motionless, his thoughts racing. He had seen enough to know that Riverstone Grill wasn't just struggling financially, it was rotting from the inside out. The note had confirmed what his instincts already knew. There was something deeply wrong here, something beyond the usual restaurant woes. There was abuse, manipulation, and exploitation happening behind the kitchen doors. And he couldn't ignore it any longer. But he wasn't about to act recklessly. He spent the next few hours in his car, parked in the back lot of a 24-hour diner. With his laptop open in front of him, Julian accessed the restaurant's security footage. Riverstone Grill had a state-of-the-art system, something he had installed when he took over ownership, but it wasn't for just monitoring the staff's efficiency. It was for moments like this. He began sifting through hours of footage, watching every moment of every shift. What he saw turned his stomach. Greg Simmons, the manager, was the source of all the problems. He was skimming tips off every credit card transaction, charging customers extra under the guise of an equipment fee, and forcing the servers to pay back money out of their own pockets for mistakes they hadn't made. The footage revealed the emotional toll it was taking on the staff. Tears in the freezer, constant threats of termination, and worst of all, Greg bullying Ariana, the waitress who had given him the note. Julian's anger surged as he documented everything: screenshots, audio, video. By the time dawn broke, he had a full dossier. He had the proof. And now, it was time to take action. No more silence. No more turning a blind eye. Riverstone Grill needed to be saved, and Julian Banks was the one to do it. The morning after the discovery, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The quiet man who had walked into Riverstone Grill the night before was no longer the same. The evidence he had gathered, the footage, the logs, the audio, was irrefutable. It was time to confront the heart of the problem. He wasn't just an investor anymore. He was now the man who could put an end to the suffering at Riverstone Grill, but he knew it had to be done carefully. At noon, Julian walked into the restaurant again. This time, he wasn't wearing the disguise of a regular customer. He was dressed in black, with 2 lawyers behind him. The staff had no idea who he was, but they would soon find out. Greg, the manager, was standing in the back, berating a dishwasher. Julian's presence caused a shift in the room. The tension was palpable. Without a word, Julian laid the printed footage on the host stand. He let it play silently, the room gradually filling with gasps and disbelief as the video showed Greg's actions, the abuse, the manipulation. The footage spoke for itself. Greg's face drained of color as he realized what had just been exposed. The staff, once too terrified to speak up, watched in stunned silence as Julian stepped forward, his voice calm yet resolute. "You're fired," he said, with finality. As Greg tried to argue, security was already at his back, ushering him out. The room remained frozen, unsure of what to do, but Julian knew. The silence was over. The truth was out. Turning to the staff, Julian's gaze softened. "Some of you knew who I was. Some didn't. But I know what you've been through." It was the beginning of a new chapter, for the restaurant, and for them. The following week, Julian watched as Riverstone Grill transformed. What had once been a place of fear and tension was now starting to feel like a true business again. Julian's actions had reverberated through every corner of the restaurant. The employees, who had once lived under the constant threat of bullying and abuse, were now feeling a sense of relief. The change was tangible. Ariana, the waitress who had risked everything by slipping him the note, was promoted to assistant general manager. Julian was quick to reward her courage. She wasn't just given a raise. She was given full benefits and the kind of responsibility that made her feel seen and heard. Julian didn't want this to be a one-off act of kindness. He wanted to instill a culture of respect and accountability that would last. He spent the week personally ensuring every employee received back pay. For the ones who had been wronged the most, those who had been forced to work off the clock or pay back tips they hadn't earned, Julian ensured they got compensated with interest. He wasn't just fixing the financial wounds, he was mending the emotional scars that Greg had left behind. A mental health stipend was also added to ensure the well-being of everyone who had suffered. As for the restaurant itself, Julian made a promise that would reshape the future of Riverstone Grill. He instituted new policies that would never allow another manager to run unchecked. Every quarter, managers would go through performance audits, and no one would ever be allowed to operate without proper HR training. The cameras, once used to control the staff, would now protect them. The change was not just in the restaurant, it was in the hearts of those who had been silently suffering. Julian had done more than save a business. He had saved lives.